Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. I never imagined that a simple act of kindness from my neighbor would shift the way I saw the world. At 44, I had settled into a predictable rhythm. Work, home, the occasional glass of wine on the porch, watching the world move around me, but never quite feeling a part of it. Life had become a cycle of responsibilities and routine, the spark of something new and unexpected long since dimmed. That is, until the night my neighbor Daniel stepped into my life in a way I never saw coming. Daniel had lived next door for about 5 years, a quiet, well-kept man in his early 50s, always polite but reserved. We exchanged pleasantries when we crossed paths, small talk about the weather, the neighborhood, the usual things. But beyond that, he remained a mystery. I knew he worked in construction, that he often left early and returned late, that he had a large, friendly dog named Max, who adored anyone willing to scratch behind his ears. Our neighborhood was one of those places where people valued their privacy. You could live next door to someone for years and still not know much about them beyond the surface. That was fine by me. I wasn't looking for deep connections. Or so I thought. It all started on a particularly cold autumn evening. I had just gotten home from work, my mind cluttered with stress and exhaustion. The air smelled like burning firewood, and golden leaves crunched under my boots as I walked up the driveway. I remember sighing at the sight of my porch light flickering, another thing I had to fix but kept putting off. As I juggled my bag and keys, I heard a voice from behind. "Hey, looks like you could use a hand." I turned to see Daniel standing at the edge of my yard, hands tucked into the pockets of his worn-out jacket, his dark eyes warm but hesitant. "Oh, hey," I replied, forcing a tired smile. "Yeah, just the usual end-of-the-day chaos." He nodded. "I noticed your porch light's been acting up. I could take a look if you want." I hesitated. It was such a small thing, but the idea of letting someone, especially someone I barely knew, into my space felt foreign. I had spent years handling things on my own, convincing myself that I didn't need help. But something in his expression made me pause. "That would actually be really nice," I admitted. He nodded and walked over, pulling a small tool from his pocket. As he worked, we made small talk, and for the first time, I found myself genuinely curious about him. He told me about his job, how he used to restore old homes before shifting to commercial work. I told him about my job at the publishing house, how I spent my days buried in manuscripts, chasing deadlines. "There," he finally said, stepping back. The porch light flickered once before glowing steadily. "That was fast," I said, impressed. I probably would have spent hours watching YouTube tutorials before giving up. He chuckled. "Sometimes it's just a loose connection. Happens more often than you'd think." I thanked him, expecting him to head back home, but instead he leaned against my porch railing, looking up at the sky. "Funny thing," he said after a moment. "When I first moved here, I thought this was just going to be another stop. Didn't expect to stay." I tilted my head. "And now?" He exhaled, his breath visible in the cool night air. "Now, I don't know. Some places grow on you." For some reason, his words stuck with me. That night, I found myself glancing toward his house more than once, thinking about how little I actually knew about the people around me. Over the next few weeks, Daniel and I crossed paths more often. It started with casual waves, then turned into brief conversations. And then, one evening, it was something more. It had been a particularly bad day at work, the kind that left me drained and irritable. By the time I got home, all I wanted was to be left alone. But as I stepped out of my car, Daniel was there, leaning against his truck, Max wagging his tail beside him. "Rough day?" he asked, his gaze studying me in that quiet, knowing way of his. I sighed. "You could say that." "Come on," he said, motioning toward his house. "You need a break." I hesitated but followed. His home was warm, inviting in a way I hadn't expected. The scent of cedar and something faintly spicy lingered in the air. He poured me a glass of wine without asking, like he already knew I needed it. We sat on his couch, Max resting his head on my knee, and for the first time in a long time, I let my guard down. We talked about everything and nothing, memories, regrets, the things we wished we had done differently. He listened without interruption, without judgment. And as the evening stretched on, something shifted between us. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, like the warmth of a fire slowly spreading through a cold room. At some point, I found myself leaning back, exhaustion washing over me. He didn't say anything, didn't try to fill the silence. He simply reached over, his hand covering mine, grounding me in a way I didn't realize I needed. "You're not alone, you know," he said softly. For the first time in a long time, I believed it. That night, as I walked back to my house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. I didn't know where this was going. I didn't know if it meant anything more than just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. But I knew one thing for certain: Daniel had done something for me that night. He had reminded me what it felt like to be seen. And that, more than anything, changed everything. The next few days felt different. It wasn't just the quiet moments we shared or the occasional wave as I passed his house. There was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was like the air around us had shifted, charged with a quiet understanding. And while I tried to convince myself it didn't mean anything, a small part of me couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something more. I had always prided myself on my independence, my ability to handle things on my own. But as I sat at my kitchen table, sipping my morning coffee, I found myself thinking about Daniel in a way I hadn't before. It wasn't just about the kindness he'd shown or the way he listened. It was the way he seemed to see beyond the surface. He saw the exhaustion I didn't know how to express, the vulnerability I tried to keep hidden. And yet, he never pushed. He simply offered a safe space. But even so, I wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this just a neighborly friendship, or was there something more to it? And if there was, what did that mean for me? It was the following Saturday when everything changed. I had just finished cleaning out my garage, a task I had been avoiding for months, when I heard a knock at my door. I opened it to find Daniel standing there, his dog Max by his side, looking as cheerful as ever. "Got a minute?" he asked, his tone casual, but there was something in his eyes that made me pause. "Of course," I replied, stepping aside to let him in. He had a way of making everything feel easy, natural. Maybe that's why I wasn't surprised when he started talking about the plans he had for the upcoming weekend, how he wanted to go hiking in the nearby mountains and thought it might be nice to have someone join him. I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to go hiking with you? I don't even own proper boots." He laughed, the sound warm and inviting. "It's not a long trek, just a few hours. Besides, it's not about the boots. It's about getting out there and breathing fresh air. I think you could use a break." I hesitated. I wasn't the hiking type. The idea of spending hours in the woods was enough to make me want to crawl back under my covers. But something in his voice, in the way he looked at me, made me want to say yes. "All right," I said finally, surprising myself. "I'll go, but don't expect me to keep up with you." He smiled that quiet, knowing smile of his. "Deal." We met the following morning, our breath visible in the crisp morning air as we set out on the trail. The woods were alive with the colors of fall, the golden leaves rustling in the wind, the earthy smell of pine filling the air. It was beautiful, peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in a long time. The further we walked, the more I found myself letting go of the stress I'd been carrying. With each step, the weight seemed to lift a little more. Daniel didn't rush me, didn't push me to go faster. He walked at a steady pace, his dog Max bounding ahead, stopping every so often to look back and make sure we were keeping up. We talked about life, about things we had never shared before, things we hadn't even realized we wanted to say. It felt so natural, so easy, and yet it was new. It was a side of me I had forgotten existed, the part of me that could enjoy simple moments without overthinking everything. About halfway through the hike, we stopped at a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. We sat on a rock, the sun peeking through the trees, casting a warm golden glow over everything. Max lay at our feet, content and calm. I looked out at the view, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. It was as if the entire world had paused, leaving just the two of us in this quiet space. "You know," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "I used to come up here a lot when I first moved in. Didn't have many friends around, just needed the solitude. But after a while, I realized something. I didn't really want to be alone anymore." I turned to him, surprised by the vulnerability in his voice. "I didn't know that about you," I said softly. He shrugged, a small, almost wistful smile on his lips. "I don't talk about it much, but I think maybe it's important to let people in, even if it's just a little bit." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. I had spent so much of my life closed off, convincing myself that I was better off that way. But in that moment, as I sat there with him, I realized how wrong I had been. Daniel's presence was more than just comforting. It was freeing. He had a way of making everything feel lighter, like the weight of the world wasn't such a heavy burden after all. And for the first time in a long time, I felt the pull of something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years: connection. As we finished the hike and made our way back to our cars, the sun beginning to dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Not just for the time spent with Daniel, but for the lesson he had unknowingly taught me, that it was okay to open up, to lean on someone when you needed it. The drive back was quiet, but comfortable. When we reached my house, I looked over at him, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "Thanks for today," I said, my voice softer than usual. He met my gaze, his eyes steady and warm. "Anytime. You're not alone, remember?" And just like that, something inside me clicked. The walls I had spent years building, the ones I thought would protect me, started to crumble. For the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to feel vulnerable, to feel seen, and it didn't scare me. It felt right. The days that followed our hike were a whirlwind of sorts. I went back to my daily routine, but something inside me had shifted. I found myself thinking about Daniel more often than I cared to admit. It wasn't just the kindness he showed. It was the way he seemed to see me, the real me. He had a way of peeling back layers I didn't even realize were there, like he could read my thoughts without me saying a word. But as much as I wanted to embrace whatever was building between us, I also felt that familiar tug of hesitation. I'd been hurt before, and I wasn't sure I was ready to open myself up to someone again. It felt safe to keep my distance, to guard my heart, even though part of me longed for something more. It was on a Wednesday afternoon, about a week after our hike, that Daniel stopped by my house again. I had just finished working from home, my laptop still open on the kitchen counter, when I heard the knock at the door. I hesitated for a moment, But then I walked over and opened it to find him standing there, holding a small bag of freshly baked cookies. "I brought these for you," he said, his voice light, but with a trace of something deeper, something more unspoken in his gaze. "Figured you could use a little treat." I laughed, surprised but pleased. "You really didn't have to do that, Daniel, but I won't say no to cookies." He smiled, that same knowing smile that seemed to reach deep inside me, making my heart skip a beat. "I didn't want you to feel like you were alone. You know, I've been thinking about how you seem to keep everything to yourself. It's okay to let people in, you know?" I felt a sharp pang in my chest at his words. It was as if he could see through all the defenses I had built over the years. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I simply nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Anyway," he continued, stepping inside, "I just wanted to check in, make sure you're doing all right. I know you've been through a lot lately." There it was again, the subtle way he made me feel seen, as if he cared about me not just as a neighbor, but as a person. It made everything inside me tremble. I wasn't used to this level of attention, this kind of kindness. It felt like I was walking a fine line, teetering between wanting to hold on and being afraid to get too close. I led him into the kitchen, where I poured us both a cup of tea, the familiar clink of mugs adding a touch of normalcy to the air. The cookies sat between us, and I reached for one, my fingers brushing his for a moment before I quickly pulled my hand away. I couldn't tell if it was intentional or just a fleeting thing, but it sent a jolt of warmth through me. "So," I said, trying to break the tension with something light, "what's been going on in your world? Any big plans this weekend?" He chuckled, settling into a chair at the kitchen table. "Actually, yeah. I've been thinking about doing a little more hiking. There's this spot I've been wanting to explore. You know, it's up near the old creek. I think it would be a nice change of scenery." The mention of the creek brought back memories of my childhood, of days spent walking through the woods, my friends and I making up stories, and pretending we were explorers on some grand adventure. I hadn't thought about that part of my past in years. "That sounds beautiful," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. "Maybe I'll join you again." I could use the escape. Daniel's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "You're welcome anytime," he said, his voice soft, almost too soft, as if he wasn't quite sure what I was offering. "I like the idea of sharing it with you, but if you're not up for it, I completely understand." I could hear the hesitance in his voice, the careful way he treaded around me, as if trying to make sure he didn't cross some invisible boundary. And yet it made me realize something. It wasn't just about the hiking. It wasn't even about the cookies or the tea. It was about the way he was trying to connect, trying to offer me a space where I could just be. No pressure, no expectations. "I'll come with you," I found myself saying before I even had time to second-guess it. "Let's do it. I need to get out of my head for a while." The weekend arrived sooner than I expected. I wasn't sure what I was more nervous about, the hike itself or the unspoken things hanging between Daniel and me. We met early in the morning, the cool air brushing against my skin as I stepped outside to join him. His car was parked in the driveway, and there he was, standing next to it, looking as relaxed as ever. "You ready?" he asked, his eyes scanning me in that way that made me feel both seen and unknown at the same time. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, let's go." The drive to the trailhead was filled with light conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing between us, something both exciting and a little terrifying. As we hiked along the winding path by the creek, the world around us felt like it had slowed down. The sounds of nature, the rustling leaves, the distant call of birds, it all blended together into a soft melody that seemed to make everything else fade away. We stopped at a spot near the water, the creek flowing gently over the rocks, and sat on a large flat stone. Max bounded ahead, chasing a stick that Daniel had thrown, but the two of us stayed still for a moment, taking in the view. "This place," I said softly, "it's peaceful." I didn't realize how much I needed this. Daniel's gaze softened as he looked at me. "I'm glad you're here. You don't have to carry everything on your own, you know." His words hit me harder than I expected. I hadn't realized how heavy the weight I'd been carrying truly was until he'd shown up, quietly offering to help bear it. It was almost too much to take in, the kindness, the care, the way he seemed to understand things I hadn't even said aloud. We sat there for what felt like hours, neither of us saying much, but the silence was comfortable. In that moment, I realized something crucial. I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to be. The days after that hike were different. It wasn't just the fresh air or the beautiful scenery that lingered. It was the quiet, unspoken bond that had started to form between Daniel and me. We didn't need to say much to understand each other, and in many ways that made it easier. I had been so caught up in the chaos of my life, the noise of the world around me, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply exist, to be present. With Daniel, it felt like I was rediscovering that peace. The weekend after our hike, I found myself walking to his house without really thinking about it. I had been spending so much time in my own head lately, contemplating where I was going, what I wanted out of life, and what role Daniel played in all of that. I didn't have the answers yet, but the uncertainty didn't scare me like it had before. When I reached his doorstep, I hesitated for a brief moment, then knocked. He answered almost immediately, as if he had been waiting, and that feeling of being truly seen returned in full force. "Hey there." Daniel greeted me with a smile that was both familiar and new, his expression soft and welcoming. "Come in. I've got coffee brewing." I stepped inside, the comforting aroma of freshly brewed coffee wrapping around me like a warm embrace. It was a quiet, peaceful morning, the kind that made everything else seem irrelevant. We sat down at his kitchen table, and the conversation flowed easily, just like it always did. But there was something more now. There was a depth to it, a layer of understanding that hadn't been there before. "So," Daniel began, looking over at me with a curious but gentle gaze, "I've been thinking about what you said the other day, about carrying things alone. I know you've been through a lot, and I want to be here for you. But I don't want to push. I don't want you to feel like you have to face everything by yourself." His words hit me square in the chest. I had spent so much time convincing myself that I could handle everything, that I could keep going alone. But the truth was, I didn't want to be alone anymore. And in that moment, I realized something. I had been shutting myself off from people because I was afraid of getting hurt. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't so bad to let someone in. Maybe I had been keeping myself from experiencing the very thing I needed the most, connection. "I don't want to be alone either," I confessed, my voice quiet but steady. I think I've been afraid to trust, to open up. But I don't want to carry everything by myself anymore. And I trust you, Daniel." He smiled, his eyes soft and understanding. "You don't have to say anything you're not ready to. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders, and for the first time in a long time, I allowed myself to breathe, to just be. And it was okay. It was more than okay. It felt like a new beginning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of quiet, comfortable moments spent together. We hiked more, cooked meals together, and simply enjoyed each other's company. But the most significant change wasn't the time we spent. It was how we spent it. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people getting to know each other at their own pace, with nothing to prove. One evening, as the sun began to set, and the world outside bathed in a soft golden glow, Daniel turned to me with a smile that was both playful and sincere. "So, what do you think? You ready for the next step?" I wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but the question felt important. I looked at him, the warmth in his eyes matching the warmth in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice a little shaky, but not from fear, from anticipation. He took a deep breath, as though choosing his words carefully. "I mean, us. I know we've been taking it slow, but I think we both know there's something here. Something worth exploring." My heart skipped a beat at his words, and I felt an unfamiliar flutter in my stomach. The idea of taking a leap with Daniel, of allowing myself to be vulnerable and open in a way I hadn't in years, seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. "I'm scared," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready. But I think I want to try." His smile softened even further, and in that moment, I realized that it didn't matter whether I was ready or not. What mattered was that I wasn't alone anymore. And maybe that was enough. In the months that followed, we built something beautiful together. It wasn't always easy. There were moments of uncertainty, times when I questioned myself or wondered if I was making a mistake. But with Daniel by my side, those doubts became smaller, quieter, as I learned to trust again, to open my heart. Looking back now, I can hardly believe how much I've changed, how much we've both changed. It's funny how something so unexpected, something as simple as a neighbor offering a helping hand, can alter the course of your life in ways you never saw coming. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the greatest gifts aren't the ones we plan for, but the ones we never saw coming. And maybe, just maybe, that's the beauty of life. It's about the unexpected moments, the ones that change everything. And with that, I couldn't help but smile. Because in the end, I realized that the greatest gift I could give myself was allowing someone in.